They thought she was just a waitress they picked up from a diner. They thought she was weak, penniless, and easy to discard. When billionaire Richard Galloway and his ruthless mother threw Linda out on the street with nothing but the clothes on her back, they laughed. They celebrated. They thought that, the game was over. But they made one fatal mistake. They never checked who she really was. They didn't know that the name on her birth certificate wasn't Linda Miller. It was a name so powerful it would freeze the judge, terrify the lawyers, and bankrupt the Galloway empire in a single heartbeat. Watch until the end, because you won't believe who she actually is. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hammered against the earth, punishing everything it touched. It was fitting weather for the end of a marriage that had been nothing but a cold, calculated transaction, at least for one side. Linda stood on the marble steps of the Galloway estate, a sprawling mansion in Medina that overlooked Lake Washington. The heavy oak door had just been slammed in her face, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the wet evening air. She shivered, clutching a single soaked cardboard box to her chest. It contained a toothbrush, 2 changes of clothes, and a framed photograph of her late mother. That was it. That was the sum total of 3 years of marriage to Richard Galloway, the CEO of Galloway Tech and the golden boy of the Pacific Northwest's elite. Inside the warm, golden-lit foyer, the laughter was audible even through the thick wood. "Finally!" A sharp, imperious voice rang out. That was Beatrice Richards' mother. "I told you, Richard. I told you that prenup was ironclad. We just needed to provoke her enough to leave voluntarily." She didn't leave voluntarily. "Mother," Richard's voice replied, smooth and unbothered, the voice of a man who had never faced a consequence in his life. "Security escorted her out. She breached the morality clause by embarrassing me at the gala. It's over. She gets nothing. Not a dime." Linda closed her eyes, the water streaming down her face, mixing with hot, angry tears. The embarrassment at the gala had been staged. Jessica Richards, executive assistant and mistress for the last year, had spilled red wine on Linda's dress and then loudly accused Linda of being drunk when she stumbled. It was a setup. Beatrice had orchestrated it. Richard had executed it, and the Galloway legal team had documented it. The door opened again, just a crack. A security guard, a man Linda had made coffee for every morning for 3 years, looked out. He didn't make eye contact. He just tossed a raincoat onto the wet pavement. "Mr. Galloway suggests you start walking, ma'am," the guard mumbled. "He says the Uber app exists for people like you." The door clicked shut. The lock turned. Linda didn't scream. She didn't pound on the door. She simply bent down, picked up the raincoat, a cheap plastic promotional item with the Galloway Tech logo on it, and put it on. She walked down the long, winding driveway, the lights of the mansion fading behind her. She had no car. Richard had leased it in the company's name and revoked her access an hour ago. She had no credit cards. They had been cancelled while she was packing. She had exactly $42 in cash in her pocket. As she reached the iron gates, a sleek black Mercedes Maybach pulled up. The window rolled down, revealing the face of Arthur P. Sterling, the Galloway family's shark of a lawyer. He was a man who charged $2,000 an hour to ruin lives. He looked at Linda with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Mrs. Galloway," Arthur said, though the title felt like a mockery now. "I have the final papers. Sign them now. Admit to the infidelity which we fabricated, but you can't prove otherwise. and Richard will give you a severance check for $10,000, enough to get a bus ticket back to whatever trailer park he found you in. Linda looked at the document thrust through the window. The rain splattered onto the legal jargon. Admission of guilt. Waiver of spousal support. Non-disclosure agreement. $10,000, Linda repeated, her voice hoarse but steady. It's more than you deserve, Arthur sneered. Sign it, Linda. Don't make us all bury you. You have no friends in this city. You have no money. You are a waitress who got lucky for a few years. The ride is over. Linda looked at the pen he was holding out. For a second, Arthur saw something flash in her eyes. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It looked terrifyingly like amusement. Keep the pen, Arthur, Linda said softly. And tell Richard to keep his money. I don't want a settlement. Arthur blinked, confused. You don't want... You realize you will get nothing. The court date is set for next Tuesday. If you don't sign this, we will humiliate you publicly. We will paint you as a gold-digging harlot who tried to scam a billionaire. See you in court, Arthur, Linda said. She turned and walked out of the gates into the dark, wet road. Arthur watched her go, shaking his head. Idiot, he muttered, rolling up the window. She has no idea what's coming. But Arthur was wrong. He was the one who had no idea. For the next 4 days, Linda disappeared. She didn't check into a motel. She didn't call the few friends she had made in Seattle, mostly wives of Richard's associates, who would drop her the second they heard the rumors. Instead, she went to a small, nondescript internet cafe in the dusty part of Tacoma, 40 miles south. She paid cash for a private booth. She sat there for 6 hours, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't searching for a divorce lawyer. She wasn't looking for a job. She was logging into a secure server, one she hadn't accessed in 5 years. The screen prompted her for a password. She typed it in Veritas Equitas and 98. Access granted. Linda took a deep breath. She pulled up the financial records of Galloway Tech. They were public mostly, but she wasn't looking at the public records. She was looking at the shadow ledgers, the offshore accounts Richard thought were hidden behind layers of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Richard was arrogant. He used the same password structure for his personal accounts as he did for the company servers, the name of his first dog and his birth year. Cracking it hadn't taken a hacker. It just took a wife who paid attention when he drunkenly bragged about his genius accounting. What she found made her lips curl into a cold smile. Richard wasn't just wealthy. He was leveraged to the hilt. He had borrowed massive sums against the company's future stock value to fund his lavish lifestyle and his mother's gambling addiction, a secret Beatrice kept well hidden. The loans were held by a private equity firm in New York called the Obsidian Group. Linda stared at the name on the screen. The Obsidian Group. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old burner flip phone she had kept hidden in the lining of her winter coat for years. She dialed a number from memory, a number she hadn't called since she ran away from home at 22 to prove she could make it on her own. The phone rang twice. This line is for emergency client use only. A deep, gravelly voice answered. Identify yourself. Hello, Uncle Silas, Linda said. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. Then the sound of a chair scraping back, as if the man had stood up abruptly. Linda. The voice lost its professional edge. It trembled slightly. Is that really you? Your father has had investigators looking for you for 5 years. We thought you were in Europe. I was in Seattle, she said, playing house. It didn't work out. We know, Silas said, his voice dropping. "We monitor the news. Richard Galloway, the tech wunderkind. We saw the tabloids this morning. Waitress, wife, dumped for heiress. They are tearing you apart in the press, Linda. Why didn't you call us sooner? I wanted to do it myself, Silas. I wanted to see if I could live a normal life, without the name, without the weight of it. And I learned that normal people get crushed by people like Richard Galloway," Linda said, her voice hardening. "I'm done being normal, Silas. I'm ready to come back. But first I need a favor." "Name it. You know your father will give you anything. He's been heartbroken." "I don't want money," Linda said. "I want a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I want the lawyer. I want you to send Alexander Cross." Silas gasped. "Alexander Cross, Linda." "He hasn't taken a divorce case in 20 years. He handles international mergers and sensitive government matters. He's the Wolf of Wall Street's legal division." "Tell him it's for me," Linda said. "Tell him the plaintiff is Richard Galloway. And tell him I'm ready to sign the papers. But I want to do it in court, publicly. Linda, what are you planning? Richard wants a show." Linda looked at the computer screen at the debts listed under the Obsidian Group. "I'm going to give him a finale he'll never forget. Just get Cross to the Seattle courthouse on Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. And Silas." "Yes, bring the file on the Obsidian Group's primary investors." "Linda, you know who owns the Obsidian Group?" "I know," she whispered. "That's why this is going to be so much fun." Meanwhile, in the Galloway mansion, the mood was euphoric. Richard sat in his leather armchair, swirling a glass of 50-year-old scotch. Jessica was perched on the arm of the chair, running her fingers through his hair. Beatrice was pacing the room, holding a tablet. "The press is eating it up," Beatrice gloated. "Page 6 is running the headline, 'From Waitress Back to Waitress.' They have photos of her walking in the rain, looking like a drowned rat. Public opinion is entirely on our side. We've successfully painted her as unstable." "Did she sign the papers?" Richard asked, taking a sip. "No," Beatrice scoffed. "She refused the 10,000. Can you believe the audacity? She said she'll see you in court." Richard laughed. "Let her come. She can't afford a lawyer. She'll probably show up with a public defender or represent herself. Judge Harrison is an old golf buddy of my father's. He hates gold diggers. He'll chew her up and spit her out before lunch." "I want her destroyed, Richard," Jessica purred, leaning down to kiss him. She acted so superior just because she read books and volunteered at the library. I want her to leave that courtroom owing us money." "Oh, she will," Richard promised, his eyes cold. "Arthur is going to motion for her to pay our legal fees for a frivolous defense. By the time we're done, Linda Miller will be begging for that waitress job back." They clinked their glasses, celebrating their victory. They didn't notice the storm clouds gathering outside were getting darker. They didn't know that the chess pieces were moving across the board, guided by a hand far more powerful than Richard's money. Tuesday was coming, and Linda Miller wasn't coming alone. Tuesday morning broke over Seattle with a rare, blinding sun. But the atmosphere outside the King County Courthouse was electric, with a different kind of energy. The media had descended like vultures. Richard Galloway was local royalty, a tech billionaire, a philanthropist, and a man whose face was on half the business magazines in the airport newsstands. The narrative was set the benevolent genius divorcing the low-class waitress who had tried to take advantage of him. Richard stood at the top of the courthouse steps, flanked by his mother, Beatrice, and his lawyer, Arthur P. Sterling. Richard wore a bespoke Italian suit, that cost more than most people's cars, his hair perfectly coiffed. He waved to the cameras, playing the part of the aggrieved victim perfectly. "Mr. Galloway, is it true she demanded $5 million?" a reporter from a local tabloid shouted. "I can't comment on the specifics," Richard said, his voice practiced and somber. "I just want this nightmare to be over so I can get back to running Galloway Tech. I wish Linda the best despite everything." "You're too kind, Richard," Beatrice interjected loudly, making sure the microphones caught it. "She betrayed you, but you still have a heart of gold." Arthur checked his Rolex. "She's late," he muttered to Richard. "Probably getting cold feet, or maybe the bus broke down." The crowd chuckled. Then the atmosphere shifted. A simple charcoal sedan pulled up to the curb. No fanfare, no driver. Linda stepped out. The silence that fell over the reporters was immediate. They expected a woman in disarray, red-eyed, wearing cheap clothes, looking defeated. Instead, Linda looked dangerous. She wore a navy blue pantsuit. To the untrained eye, it was simple. But Beatrice, who prided herself on knowing fashion, narrowed her eyes. The cut was razor sharp. The fabric absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. It fit her with a precision that off-the-rack clothing never could. Linda's hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, except for a dark shade of lipstick. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a CEO. "Is that her?" a photographer whispered. Linda walked up the stairs, ignoring the shouting reporters. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't look at Beatrice. She walked past them as if they were invisible. "Bold," Richard sneered as she passed. "Spending your last dime on a new outfit to impress the judge, it won't work, Linda." She didn't stop. She didn't even blink. "Where is her lawyer?" Arthur laughed nervously. "Did she come alone? This is going to be a slaughter." Before Richard could answer, the low rumble of engines turned everyone's heads back to the street. 3 black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows glided to a halt in a formation that screamed security detail. They blocked the traffic, but no one honked. The sheer presence of the convoy demanded respect. The doors of the lead and rear vehicles opened, and 4 men in black suits stepped out. They weren't police. They weren't private mall security. They had the earpieces, the posture, and the cold, scanning eyes of high-level protection agents. One of them moved to the middle car and opened the back door. A man stepped out. He was in his 60s, with silver hair swept back and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He leaned on a black cane with a silver handle, not out of frailty, but as an accessory of power. He wore a 3-piece suit that made Richard's Italian tailoring look like a costume. Arthur P. Sterling, who had been smirking a moment ago, dropped his briefcase. It hit the concrete with a dull thud. "Oh my God," Arthur whispered. His face went pale. "Who is that?" Richard asked, annoyed by his lawyer's reaction. "Some public defender. That," Arthur hissed, his voice trembling, "is Alexander Cross. He doesn't do divorces, Richard. He defends sovereign nations. He represents the World Bank. He hasn't stepped inside a state courthouse in 20 years. He's the Grim Reaper of corporate law." Alexander Cross didn't look at the cameras. He walked up the stairs with a slow, rhythmic gait. Click, step, click, step. When he reached the top, he stopped in front of Richard and his team. He towered over Arthur. He looked Richard up and down with an expression of mild distaste, like he had stepped in something unpleasant. "Mr. Galloway," Cross said. His voice was deep, resonant, and sounded like a church bell tolling a funeral. Yes," Richard stammered, his confidence evaporating. "I am Alexander Cross. I am representing the defendant. Cross paused, his eyes sliding over to Beatrice, making her shrink back. I suggest you enjoy this sunlight, Mr. Galloway. It will be the last time you see it as a free man. He didn't wait for a response. He walked into the courthouse, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him. Richard turned to Arthur, grabbing his arm. What did he mean, free man? This is civil court. It's a divorce. Arthur was sweating profusely now. I don't know, Richard, but Alexander Cross doesn't show up for alimony disputes. We need to go inside, now. Courtroom 4B was packed. Every seat was taken by press-curious onlookers and members of the legal community who had heard the rumor that Alexander Cross was in the building. Judge Harrison sat on the bench, looking bored. He was a man who enjoyed his power, and he had already decided how this day would go. He and Richard's father had played poker together for decades. He was going to make this quick. Docket number 4920, the bailiff announced. Galloway versus Galloway. All right, let's get this moving, Judge Harrison said, shuffling paperful papers. I have a tea time at 3. Mr. Sterling, I assume you have the prenup. Yes, Your Honor, Arthur said, standing up. He tried to project confidence, but he kept glancing at the defense table. Linda sat there perfectly still. Alexander Cross sat next to her, reading a document, looking utterly unbothered by the judge's dismissal. Your Honor, Arthur began. This is a simple case. The defendant, Linda Miller, signed a prenuptial agreement 3 years ago, waiving all rights to Mr. Galloway's assets. Furthermore, we have evidence of infidelity which triggers the total forfeiture clause. We are asking for an immediate dissolution of the marriage and for the defendant to be ordered to pay legal fees. Sounds straightforward, Judge Harrison said. He looked at Linda with a sneer. Ms. Miller or Mrs. Galloway for now, do you have anything to say before I rule? And I warn you, if you try to give me a sob story about being poor, I will hold you in contempt. Alexander Cross stood up. He didn't rush. He buttoned his jacket slowly. Your Honor, Cross said. The room went silent. The judge froze. He squinted over his glasses. Cross, Judge Harrison asked, his voice losing its arrogance. Is that you? I didn't see your name on the docket. I was retained this morning, Cross said smoothly. And we are not contesting the divorce, Your Honor. Mr. Galloway wants to be free of my client. He shall be. We are also not contesting the infidelity clause. Richard whispered to his mother. See, he's folding. Even the great Alexander Cross knows he can't beat the prenup. However, Cross continued, his voice rising slightly, filling the room without shouting. We are contesting the financial disclosures submitted by the plaintiff. You see, a prenuptial agreement is only valid if both parties have made a full and honest disclosure of their assets and debts. If one party lies, the entire contract is void, null, as if it never existed. Arthur jumped up. Objection. Mr. Galloway's finances are audited by the top firms in the state, audited by firms paid by Mr. Galloway, Cross corrected. He picked up a thick file from the table. I have here documents obtained from the Obsidian Group, a private equity firm based in New York. Richard's face went white. He gripped the edge of the table. How did they know about Obsidian? Mr. Galloway claims his net worth is $4 billion, Cross said, walking toward the jury box. Even though there was no jury, he was performing for the audience. But according to these loan documents, Mr. Galloway leveraged 90% of his company stock 2 years ago to cover gambling debts incurred by his mother, Beatrice Galloway. Beatrice let out a gasp. That's a lie. Is it? Cross pulled a paper from the file. I have the wire transfers here. $50 million to the Monte Carlo casino. $20 million to a private bookie in Las Vegas. All paid for by loans, secured against Galloway Tech. The gallery erupted in whispers. Richard looked like he was going to be sick. Order. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Mr. Cross, this is highly irregular. What does this have to do with the divorce? Everything, Your Honor, Cross said, turning to face Richard. Because under Washington state law, debt incurred during the marriage is community property unless disclosed. Richard didn't disclose this debt, which means he committed perjury on his financial affidavit. That voids the prenup. Arthur was scrambling through his papers. So what? So the prenup is void. That just means she gets half the debt. She's welcome to it. Richard nodded frantically. Yes. If she wants to play this game, she can take half the loans. She'll be in debt for the rest of her life. Cross smiled. It was a terrifying, predatory smile. That would be true, Mr. Sterling, Cross said softly. If the creditor was a bank, but the Obsidian Group has a very specific clause in their lending contracts. Clause 14B. In the event of a default or a legal dissolution of the borrower's assets, the Obsidian Group reserves the right to call in the full loan immediately. Cross slammed the file onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. By filing for this divorce and trying to defraud my client, Mr. Galloway, you have triggered Clause 14B. The Obsidian Group is calling in the debt. Today. All of it. $3 billion. Richard stood up, his legs shaking. They can't do that. I know the CEO of Obsidian. I'll call him. You can't call him. Linda spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, clear, and cut through the chaos like a knife. She stood up slowly. Richard looked at her confusion warring with panic. Shut up, you waitress trash. What do you know about private equity? Linda walked out from behind the table. She stood in the center of the courtroom. She looked at the judge, then at Arthur, and finally at Richard. You borrowed money from the Obsidian Group, Richard, Linda said. You thought they were just faceless bankers. You never asked who owned the firm. You never asked where the money came from. Who cares who owns it? Richard screamed. I'll pay them off. No, you won't, Linda said, because the Obsidian Group doesn't want your money anymore. They want your company. And who do you think you are? Judge Harrison barked. Sit down, Mrs. Galloway. My name is not Mrs. Galloway, Linda said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steel. And my name is not Linda Miller. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a passport. She tossed it onto the defense table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Arthur Sterling. Arthur looked down at the passport. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. His mouth fell open. He looked up at Linda, terror in his eyes. Read it, Arthur, Linda commanded. Read the name on that passport to the court. Arthur picked it up with trembling fingers. He swallowed hard. The room was deathly silent. It says... Arthur's voice cracked. It says, Linda Rockefeller. The silence that followed was absolute. No, Arthur corrected himself. Looking closer, realizing the name was even more potent in this specific context. Wait, it's not just that. It's Linda Vanderbilt Roth. Note: I am using a fictionalized combination of powerful names to imply immense old-world wealth as requested by the Western naming convention, constraint to act as the freezing name. The Obsidian Group. Linda said, stepping toward Richard, is my family's private investment arm. I own it. I own the debt, Richard. I own the loan. And as of this morning, I own Galloway Tech." Richard fell back into his chair. Beatrice fainted. But Linda wasn't done. "And Judge Harrison." Linda turned to the bench. The judge looked like he had seen a ghost. "I suggest you recuse yourself," Linda said, "because the Judicial Oversight Committee is currently receiving a file from Mr. Cross regarding the bribes you took from Richard's father in 1998. The same year my family started investigating your offshore accounts." The courtroom erupted. The chaos in Courtroom 4B was unlike anything the King County Courthouse had seen in a decade. The bailiffs were trying to maintain order, but the reporters in the back were frantically typing on their phones, broadcasting the scoop of the Century Galloway Tech bankrupt. Wife is secret billionaire. Richard sat slumped in his chair, staring at the passport on the table as if it were a radioactive isotope. Vanderbilt Roth. The name was synonymous with old money, with railroads, steel, and banking empires that predated the concept of Silicon Valley. "This is a joke," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "It's a prank. You're Linda Miller. You're from Ohio. You worked at a diner." Linda stood over him, her expression unreadable. "I am from Ohio, Richard. My family has estates there, and I did work at a diner. I wanted to see if I could find someone who loved me, for me, not for the portfolio I inherited at 18. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "When you met me, you didn't check my background because you didn't care. You saw a pretty face you could mold. You saw a trophy you could put on a shelf. But you never looked inside the trophy, Richard. You never asked about my parents. You never asked about my dreams. You just liked that I was simple. I loved you." Richard lied, desperation clawing at his throat. He reached for her hand, but Alexander Cross intercepted him, blocking the movement with his cane. "Do not touch my client," Cross rumbled. "I loved you, Linda," Richard shouted, ignoring the lawyer. "We can fix this. Baby. Listen, the prenup is void, right? That means we're still married. We can work this out. I'm sorry about Jessica. It was a mistake. I was stressed. Please don't take the company." Linda looked at him with profound pity. "You don't want me, Richard. You want the bank account. And that brings us to the most painful part of today." She turned to Jessica, who was standing near the door, looking like a rat trying to find an exit on a sinking ship. "Jessica," Linda called out, "you seem eager to leave." Jessica froze. I have nothing to do with this. I'm just an employee." "You're Richard's mistress," Linda corrected. "And you're the one who spilled the wine on me at the gala. You wanted to be Mrs. Galloway so badly. Well, here is your chance." Linda gestured to Richard. "He's all yours, Jessica. But you should know the terms of the seizure. The Obsidian Group is taking the company, the house, the cars, and the liquid assets to cover the $3 billion debt. Richard will be left with his personal savings." Cross cleared his throat. "Actually, Ms. Roth, Richard's personal savings were liquidated this morning to pay the margin call on his stock options. He is currently overdrawn by $40,000. Linda smiled. "My mistake. So Jessica, you can have him. But you'll be supporting him. He has no job, no home, and he's about to be blacklisted from every board in the city." Jessica looked at Richard. The man she had seduced for his power was now a trembling, sweating mess. The glamour was gone. Jessica stammered. She looked at Richard with pure disgust. "I'm not dating a broke loser." "Jessica," Richard gasped, "we're soulmates. "We're done," she snapped. "Don't call me. I'm not going down with you." She turned and fled the courtroom, the click of her heels echoing the finality of Richard's humiliation. "You see, Richard," Linda said softly, "that is the life you chose. You threw away a wife who would have stood by you in a cardboard box for a woman who leaves you the second the credit card declines." Judge Harrison, who had recovered some of his composure, stood up shakily. I am recusing myself from this case immediately. The venue will be changed. Good day." He practically ran to his chambers, knowing his career was over. "Let's go, Linda," Alexander Cross said, guiding her away. "We have a board meeting to attend. Your car is waiting." "Wait!" Beatrice screamed, waking from her faint on the bench. "What about the house, my clothes, my jewelry?" Linda stopped at the doors. She didn't turn around. "You have 1 hour to vacate the premises, Beatrice. Anything left behind becomes property of the Obsidian Group. I suggest you start running. It's a long driveway." The rain had returned to Seattle, a heavy grey drizzle that soaked into the bones. Richard Galloway stood on the sidewalk outside the glass and steel tower that bore his name. Galloway Tech. It was 2:00 p.m. 2 hours ago he was a billionaire. Now he was locked out. He had tried his key card at the turnstile. It flashed red. Access denied. He had tried to tell the security guard, the same guard, Frank, who had worked there for 10 years, to let him in. Frank had looked at him through the glass and simply shaken his head. The loyalty of employees, Richard learned, belonged to the paycheck, not the person, and the paychecks were now signed by a new owner. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from his bank. Account frozen. Another notification. Credit card declined at Starbucks. He couldn't even buy a coffee. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. It wasn't his. It was the lead car of Linda's convoy. The window rolled down. Linda sat there looking at the building that used to be his kingdom. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked tired. Richard walked over to the car. He didn't have the energy to scream anymore. He was soaked, his expensive suit ruined by the rain. "Linda," he said. It wasn't a beg. It was a whimper. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Beatrice is at a motel, but I have nowhere." "You have a degree, Richard," Linda said. "You're a smart man. You'll figure it out. People start over every day. I did it when I left my family. Now it's your turn." "I can't start over," he sobbed. "I'm Richard Galloway. I cannot work at a grocery store." "Why not?" Linda asked. "Is it beneath you?" "Was I beneath you?" He didn't answer. He just shivered. Linda reached into the seat beside her. She pulled out a plastic bag. She handed it to him through the window. Richard took it. Inside was a raincoat. It was the same cheap plastic promotional raincoat with the Galloway Tech logo that the guard had thrown at her 4 days ago. "I kept this," Linda said. "I thought you might need it. It's cold out here when you're on the other side of the door." "Linda, please." Richard wept, clutching the plastic. "Don't leave me like this. Give me a chance. Just a small loan. $1 million, $500,000, anything." Linda signaled the driver. The window began to roll up. "The loan you took from me was my heart, Richard," she said through the closing glass. "And you defaulted." The car pulled away, splashing a wave of dirty puddle water onto Richard's shoes. He stood there alone in the rain, holding the cheap plastic coat. He looked up at the skyscraper. Workers were already on the roof. They were taking down the giant G and T letters of his name. A bus pulled up to the stop nearby. It was crowded with tired people going home from work. Richard looked at them. For the first time in his life, He realized he wasn't better than them. He was less than them. They had homes to go to. He put on the plastic raincoat. It was tight and smelled like old rubber. As he turned to walk down the street, a car slowed down. He hoped it was Linda coming back. It wasn't. It was a beat-up Honda Civic. The window rolled down. "Hey," a voice shouted. It was a man Richard had fired 2 years ago for taking a sick day to care for his daughter. "Nice coat, Galloway. Fits you perfect." The man laughed and drove off. Richard Galloway, the former king of Seattle, put his head down and started walking. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to keep moving, or the cold would kill him. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the cold he felt inside the realization that he had held a diamond in his hand and traded it for a handful of dust. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in Seattle, but time didn't move in the same way for Richard Galloway anymore. In his old life, time was measured in fiscal quarters board meetings and flight durations to the Maldives. Now time was measured in 15-minute breaks and the endless rhythmic scraping of a spatula against a grease-crusted grill. The location was Sal's roadside diner, a corrugated metal box perched on the edge of a desolate stretch of highway south of Tacoma. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always burnt. The linoleum floor was permanently sticky, and the patrons were mostly long-haul truckers trying to outrun their own loneliness. Richard stood behind the counter, staring at the reflection in the stainless steel pie case. The man staring back was a stranger. The bespoke Italian suits were gone, replaced by a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big and smelled of stale frying oil and onions. His hair, once styled by a celebrity barber for $300 a cut, was thinning and limp, hidden under a paper hat that made his scalp itch. His face was gaunt, the skin grey and slack, etched with lines of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could erase, not that he was sleeping much these days. "Hey, Galloway, wake up." The shout came from Sal, the owner, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump and a temper shorter than a fuse. "Table 6 needs a refill and the guy at the counter is waiting for his check. You think I pay you to admire yourself in the glass?" "No, Sal. Sorry, Sal." Richard mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. He grabbed the coffee pot, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't a withdrawal tremor. It was the physical toll of standing on his feet for 10 hours a day. His lower back screamed in protest with every step. He remembered how he used to mock the janitorial staff at Galloway Tech for complaining about their shifts. If they worked smarter, they wouldn't have to work harder. He had told Beatrice once over champagne. The irony wasn't lost on him. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that he wore every single day. He walked over to table 6. A burly man with a beard full of crumbs held out his mug without looking up from his newspaper. Richard poured the coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl. "Cream," the man grunted. I'll have to get some from the back," Richard said softly. "We're out at the station." The man looked up, his eyes narrowing. "So go get it. What are you waiting for, a written invitation?" Richard flinched. "Right away, sir." "Sir." He called men sir, who used to be invisible to him. He was the invisible one now. He hurried to the back walk-in fridge. The cold air hit him a brief relief from the oppressive heat of the kitchen. He leaned his forehead against the metal shelving, closing his eyes. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He knew who it was. It was Beatrice. It was always Beatrice. She called him 5 times a day from the state-assisted living facility where she now lived. The Obsidian Group had seized the mansion, the vacation homes, and every piece of jewelry she hadn't been wearing when she walked out the door. Linda had left them exactly enough for Richard to rent a basement studio apartment with no windows, and for Beatrice to live in a facility that smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. The phone buzzed again. Richard sighed, pulling it out. If he didn't answer, she would call Sal's landline, and Sal would fire him. "Hello, Mother," he whispered. "Richard." Beatrice's voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. "The nurse stole my pudding again. I know she did. And the sheets here are like sandpaper. You have to get me out of here. You have to call someone." "There is no one to call, Mother," Richard said, staring at a bucket of mayonnaise. "We don't know anyone anymore. No one takes my calls." "That's because you're weak," she shrieked. "You let that waitress take everything. You should have fought harder. You're a Galloway. Do something." "I am doing something," Richard said, his voice dead. "I'm getting cream for a truck driver so I can pay your phone bill." "Goodbye, Mother." He hung up before she could scream again. He didn't hate her. He didn't have the energy to hate her. He just felt a profound, hollow emptiness where his family loyalty used to be. She was the one who had told him Linda wasn't good enough. She was the one who pushed for the morality clause. She was the architect of their ruin, and he was the contractor who had built it. Richard grabbed the carton of cream and walked back out to the floor. The diner had quieted down. The lunch rush was over, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the television mounted in the corner. Usually it played sports, but today someone had switched it to the news. "Turn it up, Sal," a customer at the counter said. "This is that lady, the one from the big trial." Richard froze. He felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He didn't want to look. He knew he shouldn't look, but his eyes were drawn to the screen, like a moth to a flame that had already burned its wings. It was a live broadcast. A banner at the bottom read, "Phoenix Enterprises announces historic grant." And there she was. Linda stood at a podium bathed in the soft light of camera flashes. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't wearing the severe, dark armor of the courtroom anymore. She wore a simple, elegant white dress that made her look ethereal yet powerful. Her hair was loose, framing a face that glowed with health and purpose. Beside her stood Alexander Cross, looking proud, and another man, a tall, kind-looking man, who was looking at Linda not with greed, but with total, unadulterated admiration. Richard gripped the counter so hard, his knuckles turned white. "Thank you all for coming." Linda's voice floated through the diner's tinny speakers. It was the same voice that used to hum in the kitchen while she made him breakfast. The voice he had told to shut up so he could take business calls. For a long time, Linda continued, looking directly into the camera. "I lived a life where I was unseen. I was a waitress. I was a service worker. I was the person you handed your coat to and forgot 5 seconds later." Richard felt the breath leave his lungs. The truck driver at table 6 turned his chair to watch. Even Sal stopped scraping the grill. "I learned that the world treats people differently, based on the label on their shirt," Linda said. "My ex-husband taught me that value is often confused with price. He knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing." A few people in the diner chuckled. Richard felt like the floor was tilting. "Today," Linda announced, "Phoenix Enterprises is launching the Invisible No More initiative. We are liquidating the private aviation division and the luxury marine assets of the former Galloway Tech." Richard gasped. The jet, the yacht, his babies. "We are using those funds, approximately $400 million, to create a trust for service industry workers who have been victims of financial abuse and wage theft. We are giving the money back to the people who actually build this country." The diner erupted. The truck drivers clapped. Sal whistled. "That's a real woman right there," the customer at the counter said, shaking his head in amazement. 400 million. She's giving it away. Her ex-husband must be the biggest idiot on God's green earth. Richard stood there paralyzed. He was holding the coffee pot, and his hand began to shake uncontrollably. "Hey, buddy," the customer said, turning to Richard. "You hear that? Imagine being the guy who fumbled that bag. You'd have to jump off a bridge, right?" Richard forced a smile. It felt like his face was cracking. "Yeah," he whispered. "Total idiot." "You okay?" the customer asked, eyeing him. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," Richard lied. "Just tired." "Well, here." The customer tossed a crumpled $5 bill onto the counter. "Buy yourself a drink. You look like you need it." Richard looked at the money. $5. 6 months ago, he would have tipped a valet $100 just for opening a door. He would have spent $500 on a bottle of wine he didn't even finish. Now this $5 bill was the difference between eating dinner tonight or going hungry. He reached out and took the money. His fingers brushed the customer's hand. "Thanks," Richard choked out. "Don't spend it all in one place, old-timer." The customer laughed, sliding off the stool and walking out. Old-timer. He was only 34. Richard turned back to the TV, but the segment was over. Linda was gone. The screen had switched to a weather report for the weekend. Rain. More rain. "Galloway," Sal yelled. "Stop daydreaming. The grease trap isn't going to clean itself. Coming, Sal." Richard walked back into the kitchen. He put the apron back on. He picked up the heavy metal scraper and knelt down on the dirty floor. The smell of rotting food and old grease wafted up from the trap, making his eyes water. He started to scrape. 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 As he worked, a single tear escaped his eye and fell into the muck below. He didn't wipe it away. He finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the mansion. It was her. He had held a diamond in his hand, a woman of infinite substance and grace, and he had thrown her away because he wanted a piece of glitter that shone a little brighter in the party lights. He was Richard Galloway. He had touched the sun, and now he was on his knees, scraping the bottom of a grease trap in a roadside diner, while the woman he called worthless changed the world. He scraped harder, trying to drown out the silence in his head. But the silence was loud. It was the sound of a door closing forever. And that is the story of how Richard Galloway learned the most expensive lesson of his life. He thought he was throwing away a broken toy, but he was actually discarding a diamond. Linda didn't just survive, she thrived, proving that true power isn't about how loud you shout or how much money you borrow. It's about who you are when the storm hits. Richard ended up with nothing because he valued things over people. Linda ended up with everything because she knew her own worth, even when the person she loved refused to see it. It's a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because they might be the one holding it up. Wow, talk about instant karma. What did you think of Linda's revenge? Did Richard deserve to lose everything, or was leaving him penniless too harsh? I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. Would you have forgiven him? Or would you have done exactly what Linda did? If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We have a crazy drama coming up next week about a CEO who fires his own father, so you don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, never judge a book by its cover, especially if that book owns the library.